The great hall of the Galactic Concord stretched for nearly a mile in every direction, its crystalline walls catching the light of three artificial suns that hung suspended in the domed ceiling far above. And Commander Elias Vance had never felt more out of place in his entire 94 years of life. He stood at the entrance, watching the alien delegates glide and slither and walk toward their designated platforms, each species more elegant than the last, and he could not help but notice how they looked at him. The way their many eyes or single eyes or compound eyes all carried the same expression of mild disgust mixed with curiosity, as if they were examining a particularly ugly insect that had somehow wandered into a palace. The Veldari were the worst, he thought, watching their tall silver forms drift past him on gravity platforms, their elongated skulls held high with an arrogance that seemed bred into their very bones. They had been ruling this part of the galaxy for over 10,000 years, and they never let anyone forget it. Commander Vance, a young human aide, whispered at his elbow, "The Earth delegation is requesting you take your seat. The session is about to begin." Vance grunted and adjusted his cane, feeling the familiar weight of the blade hidden inside its shaft, a habit he had never been able to break even after all these decades of supposed peace. He limped toward the human section of the hall, passing row after row of alien delegates who did not bother to hide their whispers. "There goes the old soldier," they seemed to say, "the relic from Earth who still thinks war is coming, the paranoid human who sees enemies in every shadow." The session began with the usual ceremonies that Vance found utterly pointless. The lighting of the Unity flame, the recitation of the Concord Principles, the formal acknowledgement of each member species in order of their membership date, which meant humans were acknowledged dead last since they had only joined 80 years ago. High Arbiter Thesson of the Veldari finally rose to address the assembly, her voice carrying through the hall like wind chimes in a storm, beautiful but somehow cold. "Honored delegates," she began, "we gather today to address the petition submitted by the Earth delegation regarding increased military patrols along the rimward frontier." A ripple of amusement passed through the assembly, and Vance felt his jaw tighten. "The humans," Thesson continued, her tone carrying just enough mockery to be insulting while remaining technically polite, "believe that the Cathari Dominion poses a renewed threat to conquered space. They cite unusual sensor readings and what they call patterns of movement in the dark regions beyond our borders." She paused, letting the silence stretch, and then she smiled, a thin, patronizing expression that made Vance want to reach for the blade in his cane. "The Security Council has reviewed this petition thoroughly, and we find no credible evidence to support these claims. The Cathari were defeated and exiled over 3 centuries ago, their fleet scattered, their homeworld reduced to ash. They are no longer a threat to anyone." The assembly murmured its agreement, heads nodding across dozens of species, and Vance watched the human ambassador sink lower in his seat with embarrassment. He had seen enough. Before anyone could stop him, Vance rose from his chair and began walking toward the central speaking platform, his cane tapping against the polished floor with each step, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent hall. "Commander Vance," the human ambassador hissed, "what are you doing? Sit down immediately." Vance ignored him and kept walking. 2 Veldari guards moved to intercept him, but something in his eyes made them hesitate. Perhaps it was the cold certainty they saw there, or perhaps it was something older and more primal, the look of a predator that had killed more times than they could count. "You do not have permission to address this assembly," Thesson said, her voice sharp with irritation. "I am taking permission," Vance replied, stepping onto the platform and turning to face the gathered delegates, "and you will hear what I have to say." The hall erupted in protests, but Vance raised his voice above them all, his words cutting through the noise like a blade through silk. 312 years ago, the Cathari Dominion controlled over 200 star systems. They enslaved billions. They built an empire on blood and suffering. And when the conquered finally gathered the courage to stop them, it took a war that lasted 40 years and cost more lives than any of you care to remember. He paused, letting his gaze sweep across the assembly, meeting the eyes of delegates who quickly looked away. I know this because I have studied every battle, every campaign, every single engagement of that war. I know how the Kethari think. I know how they fight. And most importantly, I know how they wait. Thesson made a dismissive gesture with one slender hand. You speak of ancient history, Commander. The Kethari are gone. No, Vance said, his voice dropping to something hard and cold. You exiled them. You pushed them into the dark space beyond the rim, and you told yourselves they would never come back. But exile is not defeat. Humiliation is not destruction. You broke their fleet, but you did not break their will. He reached into his coat and pulled out a data chip, holding it up for all to see. 6 months ago, a deep space probe detected unusual energy signatures in Sector Gamma 7. 3 months ago, a mining vessel reported seeing ships of unknown configuration before they lost contact. 2 weeks ago, one of our intelligence operatives intercepted a transmission in a language that has not been spoken in this galaxy for 3 centuries, Kethari Battle Code. The assembly shifted uncomfortably, but Thesson waved her hand again. Censor ghosts and coincidences. You humans see threats everywhere because you come from a world that was always trying to kill you. It has made you paranoid and violent, unable to adapt to civilized society. Vance smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You call it paranoia. I call it survival. My species has been fighting wars since before we could write, and we learned one lesson above all others. The enemy you think is dead is the one that kills you. He limped closer to Thesson's platform, close enough to see the subtle fear that flickered behind her composed expression. The Kethari remember what you did to them. They remember their burning worlds and their scattered people and their centuries of exile in the cold dark. And they have been planning their return every single day since you drove them out. Thesson's composure cracked just slightly. Even if what you say is true, what would you have us do? Mobilize the entire fleet based on the fears of one old human soldier? I would have you prepare, Vance said. I would have you remember that peace is not the natural state of the universe. It is a pause between conflicts, nothing more. But you will not listen to me because I am human and humans are primitive and violent, and we have only been part of your precious conquered for 80 years. He turned and began walking back toward his seat, but stopped halfway and looked over his shoulder at Thesson. When the Kethari come, and they will come, remember that I stood here today and offered you a chance. Remember that you laughed and called me a relic, and when your worlds are burning and your people are dying, remember that you could have listened. The assembly voted against the Earth petition by an overwhelming margin, and Vance watched the results display with no surprise whatsoever. As he left the Great Hall, a young Rithani delegate approached him with curiosity in her compound eyes. Do you truly believe war is coming, Commander? Vance looked at her for a long moment, seeing the innocence there, the genuine desire to understand. I do not believe it, he said quietly. I know it, and I pray that when it arrives, there will be enough of us left who remember how to fight. He walked out into the artificial sunlight of Station Zenith Prime, already composing messages in his head to old friends and fellow veterans scattered across human space. The galaxy would not prepare for what was coming, but humanity would, because humanity always did. 6 months had passed since Vance stood before the Galactic Conquered and warned them of the coming storm, and in that time the galaxy had done exactly what he expected, absolutely nothing. He sat on the porch of his small cabin on Haven Ivy, watching the twin suns sink below the horizon, and painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that reminded him of sunsets on Earth, back when he was young enough to appreciate such things without thinking about tactical advantages and defensive positions. Haven IV was a quiet world, a farming colony on the edge of human space, where veterans like himself came to find peace after decades of war. It had rolling green hills and clear blue rivers, and the kind of silence that could drive a soldier mad if he let it. But Vance had not come here to find peace. He had come here to prepare. His communicator buzzed with an incoming message, and he glanced at the screen to see a familiar name: Colonel Sarah Chen, retired, currently living on the colony world of New Brisbane 3 systems away. Elias, her voice crackled through the speaker, got your package. You were right about the weapons cache in Sector 12. It was exactly where the old records said it would be. Vance allowed himself a small smile, and the others. Everyone on your list has been contacted. We have 47 confirmed participants across 12 colonies. Most of them think you are crazy, but they trust you enough to follow along. That is all I can ask, Vance replied. Keep the channels open and maintain radio silence unless absolutely necessary. I do not want anyone getting suspicious. He ended the call and returned his gaze to the sunset, thinking about the network he had been building for the past 6 months. Old soldiers, retired officers, veterans who had seen combat and survived. People who understood that the galaxy was not as safe as the Conquered wanted everyone to believe. They called it the Omega Protocol, a contingency plan that existed only in the minds of those who remembered what war truly meant. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, the Conquered celebrated what they considered a great diplomatic victory. High Arbiter Thesson had become something of a celebrity after her dismissal of the human petition, appearing on broadcast networks across 100 worlds to discuss the importance of maintaining calm in the face of irrational fears. The humans are a young species, she explained during one particularly popular interview. They have only known violence and struggle. It is natural that they see threats where none exist. In time, they will learn to embrace the peace that the Conquered has maintained for centuries. The audience applauded, and Thesson smiled her thin smile, basking in the approval of beings who had never held a weapon in their lives. On Earth, the reaction was more muted. Many humans felt embarrassed by Vance's outburst, seeing it as confirmation of the galaxy's view that their species was primitive and aggressive. We need to show them we have evolved beyond our warlike past, one prominent politician declared during a press conference. Commander Vance's behavior was shameful and does not represent the values of modern humanity. But in the shadows, in the quiet corners where old soldiers gathered to share drinks and memories, a different sentiment was growing. They remembered Vance, remembered serving with him or under him, or alongside him in conflicts that the comfortable politicians had already forgotten. And when his messages arrived asking them to prepare, asking them to remember their training, asking them to be ready for something that might never come, they did not hesitate to answer. 3 months after the Conquered vote, the first sign appeared. A Veldari mining outpost in a remote system near the rimward frontier went silent. The last transmission was garbled, broken by interference that the technicians could not explain, and then there was nothing. The Conquered sent a patrol vessel to investigate, and the patrol vessel found the outpost completely empty. No bodies, no signs of struggle, no indication of what had happened to the 300 workers who had been stationed there. Equipment failure, the official report concluded, combined with a catastrophic life support malfunction. All personnel are presumed dead. No one questioned the report, because questioning it would mean admitting that something dangerous might be lurking in the darkness. 2 weeks later, another outpost went silent, and then another, and then a cargo transport vanished mid-route with all hands. The pattern was undeniable to anyone who cared to look, but the Conquered had invested too much in their narrative of peace and security to admit that something was wrong. Thesson dismissed the incidents as unfortunate accidents and assured the public that there was nothing to fear. On Haven IV, Vance received each report through his network of contacts and felt the cold certainty growing in his chest. The certainty of a soldier who has seen this pattern before, who knows exactly what it means when outposts go dark and ships disappear without explanation. "They are testing us," he told Colonel Chen during their next communication, "probing our defenses, learning our response times, mapping our patrol routes. It is textbook Cathari strategy." "How much longer do we have?" she asked. "Weeks maybe. Months if we are lucky. They will want to be certain before they strike, and they will want to strike everywhere at once." He spent his nights reviewing old battle records from the First Cathari War, studying their tactics and strategies, and looking for weaknesses that might have been overlooked 3 centuries ago. The Cathari were patient predators, he knew. They did not rush into battle like some species did. Instead, they watched and waited and planned, building their forces in secret until they were ready to overwhelm their enemies with devastating speed. It was how they had conquered 200 systems in the first place, and it was how they intended to take them back. The final warning came on a night when both moons of Haven IV hung full and bright in the sky. A conquered intelligence operative, one of the few who had not dismissed the warning signs, managed to intercept a transmission from deep space, a burst of coded signals that should not have existed. The message was short, only 5 words in ancient Cathari, but those 5 words changed everything. "The debt comes due." The operative forwarded the transmission to her superiors, who forwarded it to the Security Council, who filed it away as unverified intelligence of questionable origin, and promptly forgot about it. But a copy also reached Vance through channels that officially did not exist. He read the translation 3 times, feeling the weight of those words settle into his bones like the cold of deep space. The debt, the humiliation of exile, the loss of their empire, the centuries of suffering in the darkness, was about to be collected. Vance rose from his chair and walked to the window, looking out at the peaceful fields of Haven IV bathed in moonlight, knowing that this peace was about to end. He activated his communicator and began sending messages to every contact in his network, every old soldier and veteran and retired officer who had agreed to be part of the Omega Protocol. The message was simple. It begins, "Prepare your positions, trust no one outside the network, and remember, we are humanity's last line of defense." Within hours, across a dozen human colonies, men and women who had put down their weapons years ago began picking them up again. Weapons caches that had been hidden and forgotten were opened. Training that had been dormant for decades was suddenly recalled with perfect clarity. The galaxy slept peacefully that night, confident in the protection of the conquered and the certainty of their eternal peace. But in the shadows at the edge of human space, old soldiers were waking up, remembering who they were and what they had been trained to do. And in the cold darkness beyond the rimward frontier, 10,000 ships began their final approach, carrying an army that had waited 300 years for this moment. The storm was coming, and only the humans were ready to meet it. The invasion began at dawn across 12 star systems, and the galaxy learned in a single terrible morning that peace was nothing more than an illusion that predators allowed their prey to believe. The Cathari fleet emerged from dark space like a tide of black metal and burning engines, 10,000 warships descending upon conquered territory with the precision of a blade driven into the heart. They struck the Veldari first, perhaps as poetic justice for the species that had led the original war against them 3 centuries ago. The elegant silver cities of Veldari Prime were beautiful targets, their crystalline spires reaching toward the sky like prayers to gods who were not listening. The Cathari bombardment reduced the first city to rubble in less than an hour, and the screams of the dying were broadcast across the entire conquered communication network as a message to all who might resist. High Arbiter Thesson watched the destruction from her office aboard Station Zenith Prime, her composed expression finally cracking as she realized the magnitude of her mistake. "Mobilize the fleet," she ordered, her voice trembling for the first time in her long career. "Contact all member species. We need every ship they can spare." But the conquered fleet was not designed for war. It was designed for ceremony and patrol, and the occasional pirate interdiction. Its ships were beautiful and elegant and utterly outmatched by the brutal efficiency of Cathari warships that had been forged in the darkness for 300 years. The Battle of Thessan's Reach lasted only 4 hours before the conquered flagship exploded in a ball of fire that could be seen from the surface of the planet below. The Veldari were not alone in their suffering. The Rithani hive-worlds fell under siege as Cathari ground forces landed in numbers that should have been impossible. The insectoid defenders fought with admirable courage, but they had never faced an enemy that had spent centuries perfecting the art of extermination. One by one, the great hives went silent, their billions of inhabitants either dead or captured for purposes that no one wanted to imagine. The peaceful Andurian philosophers, who had not known war for over 5,000 years, surrendered their worlds without a fight, hoping that cooperation would earn them mercy. The Cathari accepted their surrender and enslaved them anyway, because mercy was not a concept that existed in their vocabulary. Across the galaxy, the conquered crumbled like sand castles before a rising tide, and the species that had laughed at human paranoia now screamed for human help. But Earth's colonies had gone dark. Every human settlement from the core worlds to the frontier had activated emergency protocols and severed all communication with the outside galaxy. The conquered intelligence service assumed they had been overrun, another victim of the Cathari advance. They were wrong. On HFY, Commander Elias Vance stood in the command center of what had been a peaceful farming community, and was now a fortress bristling with weapons and determination. "Report," he demanded, and the young officer beside him straightened with barely concealed fear. "Cathari scout ships have been detected entering the system, Commander. Estimates suggest a full invasion force will arrive within 6 hours." Vance nodded, unsurprised. HFY was a small colony, barely 5,000 people, and the Cathari would expect it to fall quickly like all the others. "What are our defenses?" 3 orbital platforms with pulse cannons, 12 ground-based anti-ship batteries, and approximately 800 combat-ready personnel. We also have the tunnel network completed as you ordered. The tunnel network had been Vance's first project when he arrived on HFY 2 years ago. He had spent his own credits hearing miners to carve out a maze of underground passages beneath the colony, connecting homes and farms and the central bunker where non-combatants now waited. Everyone had thought he was crazy, building defenses for a war that would never come. They were not laughing anymore. "Good," Vance said. "Remember the plan, we let them land. We let them think they have won. And then we make them pay for every inch of ground with blood they cannot afford to lose." The Cathari arrived exactly when predicted, their ships darkening the sky like a swarm of metal locusts. They bombarded the colony from orbit, reducing buildings to rubble and fields to craters, confident that the primitive humans below would either surrender or die. They did not expect resistance. The first wave of ground troops landed near what had been the colony's main square, hundreds of Cathari soldiers in black armor spreading out to secure the area and round up survivors. They found nothing but empty streets and silence. Then the ground erupted. Vance had positioned his people in hidden bunkers and underground passages, and they emerged from the earth like ghosts made of fury and firepower. The Cathari found themselves surrounded, their superior numbers meaningless in the close-quarters chaos of rubble-strewn streets where every shadow could hide a human with a weapon. The battle lasted 3 days. The Cathari sent reinforcement after reinforcement, certain that a small farming colony could not possibly hold against a proper military force. Each time, They took casualties that should have been impossible, losing soldiers to traps and ambushes, and the terrifying determination of humans who refused to accept defeat. Vance was everywhere during those 3 days, appearing in different sections of the battle to rally defenders and lead counterattacks. His old body screamed with pain that he ignored, his prosthetic arm overheating from constant weapon fire, his cane long since abandoned in favor of a rifle that never left his hands. On the 3rd day, the Cathari commander ordered a tactical withdrawal. They had taken Haven IV, technically. The colony was destroyed, its defenders scattered into the wilderness to continue guerrilla operations. But the victory had cost them 3 ships and 4,000 soldiers. 4,000 soldiers for one small colony of farmers and old veterans. Aboard the Cathari command ship, Dominion warlord Sithrak reviewed the battle data with growing unease. "Explain this," he demanded of his tactical officer, gesturing at the casualty reports that should have been impossible. "The humans fought differently than we expected, warlord. They did not surrender when faced with overwhelming force. They did not negotiate or plead. They simply continued fighting until they could no longer hold their positions, and then they retreated to fight again elsewhere." Sithrak studied the holographic display showing the human colony's defense network, the intricate tunnel system, the carefully positioned ambush points. This was not improvised, he realized. This was planned. They knew we were coming. They prepared for us. "Yes, warlord, and our intelligence suggests similar preparations have been made across all human settlements. They call it the Omega Protocol." Sithrak was silent for a long moment, processing this information through the lens of 3 centuries of planning and waiting. "The other species collapsed within days," he said finally. "The Veldari, the Rithani, the Andurians. They had no will to fight, no preparation for war. But these humans—" He pulled up images from the battle, showing human soldiers charging into certain death to buy time for their comrades, showing wounded fighters continuing to fire until their last breath, showing children as young as 12 manning defensive positions, because there was no one else left. "These humans are Cathari in soft skin," he murmured, and there was something in his voice that might have been respect or might have been fear. He turned to his communications officer. "Send word to the fleet commanders. Our campaign against human space is suspended until further notice. We will focus on consolidating our gains against the weaker species first." On the surface of Haven IV, hiding in a cave network that the Cathari had not yet discovered, Vance received word that the enemy fleet was withdrawing. He allowed himself a moment of grim satisfaction before turning to the survivors gathered around him. "This is not victory," he told them. "This is survival, but survival is what we do. Survival is what we have always done. Now we wait for Earth to respond." And far across the galaxy, on the burning stations and occupied worlds of the conquered, a desperate message was being transmitted on every available frequency. "To the humans of Earth, we need you, please help us." For the first time in 80 years, the galaxy was asking humanity for something other than compliance. They were asking them to fight. Deep beneath the surface of Earth's moon, in caverns that had been carved out over decades and hidden from every sensor and satellite in the galaxy, the United Earth Defense Council convened for the first time in 40 years. Fleet Admiral Jennifer Chen stood at the head of the massive holographic display, watching the red markers that represented forces spreading across conquered space like a disease. "The situation is critical," she announced to the assembled commanders. 12 member species have been attacked. The Veldari have lost 60% of their territory. The Rithani hive worlds are either fallen or under siege, and the Conquered's peacekeeping fleet has been effectively destroyed. A murmur passed through the room, but it was not a murmur of fear. These men and women had been preparing for this moment their entire careers. "What about our colonies?" asked General Torres, commander of the Marine Corps. The Omega Protocol was activated successfully across all human settlements. Casualties have been significant, but every colony held long enough to evacuate civilians and establish guerrilla operations. Commander Vance's preparations saved thousands of lives. Admiral Chen pressed a control, and the display shifted to show Earth's true military disposition, not the small defensive fleet that the galaxy believed humanity possessed, but something far larger. For the past 80 years since we joined the Conquered, we have maintained the illusion of military weakness. Our official fleet numbers were accurate, but they did not include the Shadow Fleet. 300 warships appeared on the display, hidden in classified shipyards scattered throughout human space, each one designed not for elegance or ceremony but for a single purpose: war. These vessels were built in secret, using technologies we chose not to share with the Conquered. Each one carries weapons systems that our allies do not know we possess, and each one is crewed by personnel who have trained for exactly this scenario. She looked around the room at faces that showed no surprise, because everyone present had always known this day would come. The Conquered has requested our assistance. More specifically, they have begged for it. For 80 years they called us primitive and paranoid and violent, and now they are discovering why those traits have kept our species alive for 200,000 years. Admiral Chen straightened to her full height. Effective immediately, the Shadow Fleet is activated. All personnel are to report to their assigned vessels. We deploy in 12 hours. The room erupted into controlled chaos as commanders rushed to implement orders that had been waiting in sealed files for decades. 12 hours later, the human fleet tore through slipspace toward Cathari positions, their ships ugly and brutal, and utterly terrifying to the enemy scouts who detected their approach. On the surface of HFY, Commander Vance was preparing for another night of guerrilla operations when a shuttle broke through the Cathari orbital blockade and landed in a clearing 3 miles from his position. He assumed it was an enemy trap until a familiar voice crackled over his communicator. "Commander Vance, this is Captain Rodriguez of the UES Vengeance. Admiral Chen sends her regards and requests your presence aboard the flagship Perseverance. She says she needs someone who knows how the Cathari think." Vance felt something stir in his chest, not hope exactly, but something close to it. "Tell her I am on my way." The shuttle extracted Vance and a handful of other survivors before the Cathari could respond, accelerating to orbit and docking with a destroyer that immediately jumped to slipspace. When Vance stepped onto the bridge of the Perseverance, he found Admiral Chen waiting for him with a tactical display already showing Cathari fleet positions. "Commander," she said, extending her hand, "welcome aboard. I have read your reports from HFY. Your defense bought us time we desperately needed." Vance shook her hand, nodding the strength in her grip and the steel in her eyes. She was young compared to him, barely 60, but she had the look of someone who understood what war required. "What is our objective, Admiral?" Chen gestured to the display, highlighting a system that Vance recognized immediately: Veldari Prime. The Cathari have established their main forward base in orbit around Veldari Prime. They are using the surviving population as shields, betting that we will not attack a world full of civilians. They are wrong. She outlined the plan with the efficiency of someone who had been rehearsing it for years. A diversionary attack to draw out the Cathari defensive fleet, followed by a precision strike against their command ships, and then a ground operation to liberate as many Veldari as possible. "It is risky," Vance observed. "The Cathari will not expect us to attack so aggressively, but if we fail, we lose everything." "We will not fail," Chen replied, and there was absolute certainty in her voice, because failure means extinction, and humanity does not accept extinction. The Battle of Veldari Prime began 3 days later, and it was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Human ships did not fight like conquered vessels. keeping their distance and exchanging elegant volleys of fire. Instead, they charged directly into Cathari formations, accepting damage that would have caused any other fleet to retreat, closing to ranges where their superior weapons could tear through enemy hulls. The Cathari commander, a veteran of dozens of campaigns, watched in disbelief as human destroyers deliberately rammed his cruisers, their crews ejecting seconds before impact and immediately being recovered by support ships for deployment elsewhere. "This is insanity," he transmitted to his fleet. "No species fights like this. They are destroying themselves to destroy us." But the mathematics of war had shifted. For every human ship lost, 3 Cathari ships were destroyed, and human losses were not permanent. Their crews survived to fight again, transferred to reserve vessels that were already deploying from slipspace. On the ground, human marines landed in the ruins of Veldari cities and began the brutal work of urban combat. They fought in conditions that would have broken any other species. Cathari warriors twice their size, streets filled with toxic smoke and rubble, civilians screaming for help while enemy snipers covered every approach. And they did not stop. Vance led a strike team against a Cathari command post, his prosthetic arm now fitted with a plasma cutter that he had borrowed from the engineering bay. He was 94 years old and should have been resting in a medical bay, but rest was for people who were not at war. The command post fell after 2 hours of close-quarters fighting, and Vance personally captured the intelligence files that revealed the location of Warlord Sithrak's flagship. "Admiral," he reported, breathing hard and ignoring the blood dripping from a wound in his side, "I have the target. He is aboard the Dominion's Fury in high orbit. If we can reach him, we can end this." Chen did not hesitate. She ordered the Perseverance and its escort squadron to break through the orbital defenses, accepting casualties that made her officers flinch. The boarding action was broadcast across the galaxy, captured by drones that the media teams had deployed specifically for this purpose. They wanted the universe to see what humanity was capable of. Human marines cut through the hull of the Dominion's Fury and poured inside, fighting through corridors designed for beings twice their size, climbing over the bodies of fallen Cathari to reach the command deck. Vance was first through the door. Warlord Sithrak stood in the center of his throne room, surrounded by his personal guard, his massive form radiating the kind of confidence that came from centuries of dominance. "You," he said, recognizing Vance from the intelligence reports, "the old soldier who warned them. You were right, it seems." Vance raised his weapon. "Surrender, and this ends without more bloodshed." Sithrak laughed, a deep rumbling sound that echoed through the chamber. "You are old, you are broken, you have 1 foot in the grave already. Why would I fear you?" Vance smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had nothing left to lose. "I am old, yes, I am broken certainly, but I am human and we do not stop fighting until we are dead, and sometimes." He moved faster than Sithrak expected, decades of combat experience guiding his body through motions that should have been impossible for a man his age. Not even then. The plasma cutter ignited, and Warlord Sithrak discovered too late that age and desperation could be far more dangerous than youth and arrogance. The war ended not with a treaty or a ceremony, but with the slow, grinding collapse of an empire that had believed itself invincible. With Warlord Sithrak dead and the Dominion's command structure shattered, the Cathari fleet splintered into factions that turned on each other almost as quickly as they retreated from human forces. The species that had spent 3 centuries nursing their hatred and planning their revenge discovered that hatred alone was not enough to hold an army together when that army was losing. Human pursuit ships hunted the remnants across the rimward frontier, not to exile them this time but to ensure they could never threaten the galaxy again. There would be no dark space refuge for the survivors, no hidden shipyards where a new fleet could be built, no opportunity for another 3 centuries of patient waiting. This time, Admiral Chen declared in her final war address, we finish what the conquered started 300 years ago, not because we enjoy destruction, but because we learned long ago that mercy shown to those who show no mercy is not compassion, it is suicide. The campaign took another 6 months, and when it was finally over, the Cathari Dominion existed only in history books and the nightmares of those who had survived their occupation. But victory came at a terrible price. 12 conquered worlds had been destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. Billions of beings across dozens of species had died. The elegant halls of Station Zenith Prime were now crowded with refugee camps, filled with survivors who had lost everything they ever knew. The Veldari had suffered most of all, their population reduced by nearly half, their beautiful cities reduced to ruins, their ancient certainty of superiority shattered beyond repair. High Arbiter Thesson stood before the reassembled Galactic Concord, and for the first time in her long life, she did not know what to say. The hall was different now. The crystalline walls still caught the light of the artificial suns, but there were cracks in the crystal, damage from the brief Cathari occupation that had not yet been repaired. The delegates who filled the chamber were different too, fewer of them, wearier, their arrogance replaced by something that looked almost like humility. Honored delegates, Thesson began, her voice carrying none of its former confidence, I stand before you today not to celebrate our victory, but to acknowledge our failure. A murmur passed through the assembly, but no one interrupted. 8 months ago, a human soldier stood in this very hall and warned us that war was coming. He told us that the enemy we believed defeated was merely waiting. He begged us to prepare, to remember that peace is not permanent, to accept that the universe is not as safe as we wanted to believe. She paused, and when she continued, her voice trembled with emotion that she did not try to hide. We laughed at him. We called him primitive and paranoid. We dismissed his warnings as the fears of a violent species that could not adapt to civilized society. And then the Cathari came, and we learned exactly how wrong we were. She turned to look at the human delegation, and for a moment her eyes found Commander Vance, seated in his usual place at the back of the chamber, his body wrapped in medical bandages, and his prosthetic arm replaced with a newer model that he had not yet learned to trust. The humans saved us, Thesson continued, not because they owed us anything. We had given them nothing but contempt since they joined the conquered, but because that is who they are. They fight for those who cannot fight for themselves, even when those people do not deserve their protection. She stepped down from the speaking platform and walked toward the human section, her movement slow and deliberate, her silver form seeming diminished somehow despite her height. We called them primitive. We were wrong. Their violence is not savagery. It is survival. Their paranoia is not madness. It is wisdom. And their refusal to abandon us, even after everything we had done and said, is not naivety. It is a kind of honor that we had forgotten could exist. She stopped in front of Vance and did something that no Veldari High Arbiter had ever done before. She bowed, lowering her elongated skull until it was level with his scarred human face. On behalf of the Galactic Conquered, I offer my deepest apology to Commander Elias Vance and to all of humanity. We were fools, and our foolishness cost billions of lives. We can never repay that debt, but we can promise to listen next time. The assembly erupted in applause, not the polite, ceremonial applause that usually followed political speeches, but genuine, heartfelt appreciation from beings who understood how close they had come to extinction. When the noise finally died down, a conquered official approached Vance with a formal document. Commander, the Security Council has voted unanimously to create a new Galactic Defense Council with the authority to prepare for future threats. We would be honored if you would accept a permanent seat on this council. Vance looked at the document for a long moment, then shook his head. I am 94 years old, he said, his voice tired but steady. I have fought my last war. Give the seat to someone who will still be alive when the next threat comes." He paused, meeting the official's eyes with an intensity that made the younger being take a step back. "And there will be a next threat. There always is. The universe does not care about our peace treaties or our diplomatic ceremonies. It simply produces new dangers, and those who are not prepared for them do not survive." The official nodded, understanding the truth in those words. "Then what would you have us do, Commander?" "Remember," Vance said simply, "remember this war. Remember the cost of arrogance. Remember that the species you dismiss as primitive might be the ones who save your life. And never, ever stop preparing for the day when everything you believe about safety and peace is proven wrong." 3 weeks later, Vance returned to Havenavi. The colony was being rebuilt, new buildings rising from the ashes, new fields being planted where the Kethari bombardment had left only craters. The survivors had returned from their hiding places in the wilderness, and they greeted Vance not as a war hero, but as a neighbor who had simply done what needed to be done. He walked through the streets slowly, leaning on a new cane, this one actually necessary for his aging body, and watching the reconstruction with quiet satisfaction. Near the central square, where the first battle had been fought, a group of refugees from Veldari Prime was being settled into temporary housing. They looked lost and frightened, these elegant beings who had never known hardship, and Vance felt an unexpected surge of compassion for them. A small Veldari child, no more than 6 years old by human standards, noticed him standing there and approached with the fearless curiosity of the young. "You are Commander Vance," she said, her voice high and musical, "the human who warned everyone." "I am," Vance agreed, kneeling down despite the protest of his joints. The child reached out and touched one of the scars on his face, her silver fingers tracing the old wound with wonder. "What are these?" she asked. "These are lessons," Vance said softly. "Each one taught me something. This one taught me to duck. This one taught me never to turn my back on a wounded enemy. And this one," he pointed to the largest scar running from his temple to his jaw, "this one taught me that surrender is not always an option." The child considered this with the seriousness that only children can muster. "What is the most important lesson?" she asked. Vance smiled, a real smile this time, not the grim expression he wore in battle, and tapped his chest over his heart. "Never stop fighting for the people next to you. That is the lesson that matters most. Not because fighting is good, but because some things are worth protecting, and if you are not willing to fight for them, you will lose them." The child nodded solemnly, as if she understood something profound, and then ran back to her parents who were watching the exchange with expressions of gratitude and awe. Vance rose and continued his walk through the colony, watching the sun set over fields that would soon be green again, thinking about all the battles he had fought and all the lessons he had learned. The galaxy had paid a terrible price for its arrogance, but perhaps, just perhaps, the survivors would remember the lesson this time. He doubted it, of course. In his experience, beings had short memories and an endless capacity for convincing themselves that the future would be different from the past. But that was not his concern anymore. His concern was this colony, these people, this small corner of the universe where he had chosen to make his final stand. The war was over, and humanity had proven once again what they had been proving since they first climbed down from the trees and looked up at the stars with wonder and determination. They were survivors, they were fighters, they were stubborn and paranoid and violent and absolutely unwilling to accept defeat. And as long as they remembered those lessons, as long as they passed them down to their children and their children's children, the galaxy would never have to face another threat alone. Vance reached his cabin as the last light faded from the sky, and he sat down on his porch with a satisfied sigh. Tomorrow there would be more work to do, more preparations to make, more lessons to teach to those who were willing to learn. But tonight he would rest. He had earned that much at least.